The Father's Justice. My name is Ryan Walker, and I died. Twice. The first time, I didn't even realize it was happening. One moment I was at my desk, staring at numbers that suddenly refused to make sense, and the next, everything just stopped. Not loudly, not violently. It was quiet. Too quiet. Like the world had been placed on mute, and I was drifting somewhere weightless, suspended between something I couldn't hold on to and something I couldn't understand. There was no pain, no panic, just an unsettling stillness that felt almost peaceful, until a voice cut through it. "Stay with me, Ryan. Stay with me." That was the first time Dr. Emily Carter pulled me back. I didn't see her face then, just heard the urgency in her voice, sharp and controlled, like someone refusing to lose a battle they hadn't agreed to fight. And then, darkness again. They told me later it happened twice. Twice, my heart gave up. Twice, my body decided it was done. And twice, she brought me back. When I finally woke up, the world felt heavier than before. The lights were too bright. The air is too thick. Machines surrounded me, beeping in slow, steady rhythms that reminded me I was still here, somehow. Tubes ran through places I didn't want to think about, and every breath felt borrowed, like it didn't fully belong to me yet. A nurse stood beside me, adjusting something on the IV with practiced ease. "Welcome back," she said, calm, almost casual, like this was just another day for her. "How long?" My voice barely existed. "3 days," she replied, glancing at me briefly. "You coded twice. Dr. Carter didn't let you go." 3 days, gone, just like that. I turned my head slightly, scanning the room. Flowers sat near the window, cards from the office, a balloon tied awkwardly to a chair. Small signs that people knew, that people had shown up in their own ways. But the chair beside my bed, it was empty. There's a kind of silence that fills a room when someone important isn't there. You don't hear it at first, but once you notice it, you can't ignore it anymore. "Has my wife been here?" I asked. The nurse hesitated, just for a second. It was subtle, the kind of pause you only catch if you're really paying attention. Then she straightened slightly. "She's been informed," she said carefully. "She called earlier, to check on you." Called. Not came. Called. The word sat heavily on anything else in that room. Heavier than the machines. Heavier than the air in my lungs. I stared at the ceiling, trying to process something that didn't quite fit. Not yet. Not fully. But it was there. A crack forming beneath everything I thought I understood about my life. "I died twice," I whispered. More to myself than to her. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Because in that moment, lying there, barely stitched back together, I realized something far worse than the fear of dying. I had almost left this world, and the one person who was supposed to be there wasn't. Chloe called that night, her voice warm, soft, perfectly measured, like nothing in the world had shifted. "Ryan, I've been so worried," she said, the concern almost convincing if you didn't listen too closely. I held the phone against my ear, staring at the dim hospital ceiling, listening not just to her words, but to the spaces between them. "I coded twice," I told her quietly. There was a pause, brief, controlled. "I know. I heard," she replied, her tone tightening, just slightly, before smoothing itself out again. "But you're okay now, right? The doctors said you're stable." Stable. The word felt clinical, distant, like she was talking about a report, not a person. "Chloe, I almost died." "I know, Ryan," she said again, quicker this time. "And that's exactly why you need to rest. You're in the best place possible. You have doctors, nurses, everything you need." I closed my eyes for a moment. "I need my wife." Silence. "Not long, but long enough." "The trip is in a few days," she said finally, her voice shifting into something more practical, more grounded in logistics than emotion. "We've already paid for everything. The flights are non-refundable. The hotel is booked. It's been planned for months." For a second, I thought I had misheard her. My mind tried to rearrange the sentence into something that made sense, something that matched the moment I was in. But it didn't change. Chloe. I said her name slowly, like I was giving her a chance to hear herself. I'm in the ICU. And you're stable, she replied, a little firmer now. Ryan, listen to me. This trip. I need this. It's just a few days. You're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. The words landed without weight, without urgency, like she was reassuring someone about a delayed flight, not a man who had just been pulled back from death twice. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter, something colder. Who are you going with? I asked. Another pause. Shorter this time. Smoother. Carol. And the girls, she said. You know that. Yes, I knew that. I had known that answer for a long time. It had been the answer to late nights, weekend trips, unexplained absences that always came wrapped in the same familiar explanation. Carol and the girls. Reliable, convenient, untouchable. I stared at the monitor beside my bed, watching the steady rhythm of a heart that had already failed me twice. Right, I said softly. Carol. You'll barely even notice I'm gone, she added lightly. And I'll be back before you know it. I promise. I almost laughed, but it didn't come out. Okay, I said instead. There was a flicker of surprise on the other end. Okay? Yeah, go. Have a good trip. Relief moved through her voice immediately, subtle but undeniable. Thank you, Ryan. Really, I'll call you every day. Of course you will, I said. We stayed on the line for a few more seconds, neither of us saying anything meaningful, just filling space out of habit. Then the call ended. The room fell quiet again. Except this time, the silence felt different. Heavier. Clearer. I lay there, listening to the machines that had kept me alive, and for the first time, I wasn't thinking about how close I had come to dying. I was thinking about what I had just heard, about how easily she chose, and how calmly I had let her, because something inside me had already started to understand. Even if I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet, this wasn't a mistake. This was a decision, and so was mine. Something changed in me after that hospital room, but not in the way people like to describe. There was no sudden gratitude for life, no overwhelming wave of emotion, no dramatic promise to live differently. What actually happened was quieter than that, and far more dangerous. I became precise. It's hard to explain unless you've felt it, but everything unnecessary just fell away. The noise, the assumptions, the blind trust you carry simply because it's easier than questioning what's in front of you, gone. What replaced it wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness. It was clarity. I noticed things I would have ignored before. The way Chloe spoke, not just what she said, but how she said it. The rhythm of her words, the small delays before certain answers, the way her tone shifted when a question came too close to something real. I realized something uncomfortable. I had been listening to her for years, but I had never actually been hearing her. Not completely, not honestly. After you come that close to losing everything, you stop reacting the way people expect you to. There's no urgency to argue, no need to prove a point, no instinct to confront immediately. Because confrontation is emotional, and emotion clouds judgment. And for the first time in my life, I didn't want to be clouded. I wanted to see. So I stopped asking questions that invited lies, and started paying attention to the answers that came without being asked. Chloe thought I was recovering, that the quiet in me was weakness, exhaustion, maybe even gratitude. She mistook stillness for surrender. That was her first mistake. Because what looked calm on the surface was something else entirely. Something deliberate. I smiled when I needed to, nodded at the right moments, kept my voice steady, predictable, safe. I gave her exactly the version of me she expected to see. And while she relaxed into that version, I watched. I watched how easily she moved through conversations that should have been heavier, how naturally she shifted topics when something felt too close, how her phone never quite left her side anymore, how it no longer charged where I could see it, how her laughter changed depending on who was on the other end of the call. None of it was proof, but together, it was a pattern, and patterns don't lie. I didn't feel the urge to confront her. That surprised me at first. The old version of me would have demanded answers, pushed for explanations, tried to fix something that was already breaking. But that version of me didn't survive that hospital bed. This version understood something simpler. You don't interrupt someone when they're revealing who they really are. You let them finish. So I said nothing. I didn't accuse. I didn't react. I didn't even let myself feel more than I needed to. Because for the first time, I wasn't trying to save the marriage. I was trying to understand it. And once you understand something completely, you don't need emotion to guide your next move. You just need timing. Chloe came home with the kind of energy people bring back from a place that never asked anything from them. Sun on her skin, lightness in her voice, stories already lined up before she even set her bag down. She talked about the ocean first, then the sunsets, then a restaurant by the water where, apparently, everything tasted better simply because it was far away. I stood there listening, nodding at the right moments, not interrupting, not questioning, just letting her speak, because when people are comfortable, they stop being careful. And that's when the inconsistencies begin. She mentioned a snorkeling trip, but couldn't quite remember which day it happened. She talked about a long dinner that Carol absolutely loved, but skipped over details that should have been easy. Simple things, like what they ordered, who else was there, and how the night ended. It wasn't what she said that mattered. It was what she avoided without realizing it. The gaps, the places where a story should have been smooth, but wasn't. Carol must have loved that place, I said casually, leaning against the counter, keeping my tone light, almost distracted. She did, Chloe replied quickly. What was it called again? A pause. Barely a second. But it was there. I don't remember the name, she said, brushing it off with a small laugh. You know how those places are, all kind of the same. I nodded slowly. Of course, all the same. Maybe we should all go sometime, I added. You, me, Carol, her husband, what was his name again? Another pause. Shorter this time, but sharper. Jeff, she said. Right, Jeff. I smiled faintly. We should set that up. Yeah, maybe, she replied. But there was something different in her voice now. Not uncertainty, something closer to awareness. Like she had just realized the conversation had shifted without her noticing when. That name, Jeff, had existed in our lives for years, always just out of reach. Someone I had somehow never spoken to, never met, despite how often Chloe seemed to spend time with them. At some point, I would have questioned that, pushed for answers, asked why. But now, I didn't need to. Because the more she talked, the clearer it became. Carol and the girls wasn't a detail. It was a shield. A convenient answer that ended conversations before they could begin. And once you see something like that for what it is, you start to notice how often it's used. How easily it appears whenever something doesn't quite add up. I let the conversation drift after that. Let her move back into safer territory. Stories about beaches, laughter, things that didn't require precision. She relaxed again, thinking the moment had passed, thinking she had filled the silence well enough. But the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of information. Every hesitation, every deflection, every small shift in tone, it all settled into place, forming something that no longer needed confirmation. Not yet, not directly. So I tested nothing else. I didn't push. I didn't press. Because tension doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from knowing something the other person doesn't realize you know. And in that moment, standing there while she spoke so easily about a trip that didn't quite exist the way she described it, I understood something with complete certainty. Chloe thought she was telling a story, but what she was actually doing was exposing one. Kevin Parker had always been a terrible liar, not because he lacked intelligence, but because he cared too much. It showed in the way he avoided eye contact, in the way his sentences never quite landed where they were supposed to. So when I walked into my office that morning and saw him leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed a little too tightly, I knew before he said a single word. Something had been sitting on his chest for a long time. "Ryan," he started, then stopped. A small shake of his head followed, like he was trying to talk himself out of whatever he had already decided to say. I set my bag down slowly. "Kevin, you look better," he said, forcing a half smile. "I am," I replied. "You don't." That landed. He exhaled quietly, eyes dropping to the floor for a moment before coming back to me. "There's something I should have told you a while ago." I didn't move, didn't react, I just waited. That made it harder for him. "It's not what you think," he added quickly, then immediately corrected himself. "Actually, it's exactly what you think." Then, a pause stretched between us. Not uncomfortable, just inevitable. "Say it," I said. He nodded once, like that was all the permission he needed. "It started months ago. Maybe longer. I wasn't sure at first. I didn't want to assume." His jaw tightened slightly. "But I saw her, Ryan. With him." "With who?" "Dylan Scott." The name didn't hit me the way it should have. Not at first. It just settled, like a piece of a puzzle sliding into place exactly where it had been waiting. "From M&A?" I asked. Kevin blinked, surprised. "You know him?" "I know of him." That was enough. Kevin shifted his weight, stepping further into the room, closing the door behind him, as if what he was about to say needed walls around it. "The first time, it was at that company mixer. You remember? The one you dragged me to, even though neither of us wanted to be there." I did remember. "She came to pick you up," he continued. "You were across the room, talking to clients, doing what you always do, and she was at the bar, with him. 20 minutes, Ryan. Maybe more." I said nothing. At the time, I thought, maybe it was nothing, just a conversation. But then, I started seeing patterns. There it was again. Patterns. Her car is in the garage, weekends you weren't in town, late evenings, days that didn't make sense. He hesitated, then added quietly, "Tuesdays and Thursdays. And yoga days." I almost smiled. "I should have told you sooner," Kevin said, his voice lower now. I didn't want to be wrong." "You weren't," I said calmly. He searched my face then, like he was expecting something. Anger, shock, anything that resembled the reaction a man is supposed to have when he hears something like this. But there was nothing there for him to find. "How long?" I asked. Kevin exhaled slowly. "At least 7 months. Maybe 8. It didn't start all at once. It built slowly. But by the time I realized what I was looking at, it wasn't new anymore. 7 months. That meant it overlapped everything. The dinners, the conversations, the quiet nights at home that I had mistaken for normal. "And Maui?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. That was answer enough. "They flew out together, Ryan. Not Carol. Not the girls. Dylan." The timeline snapped into place so cleanly it was almost impressive. Every inconsistency, every hesitation, every detail that hadn't quite made sense before now, aligned perfectly. There was no missing piece left to find. Just the truth. Kevin ran a hand through his hair, frustration written all over him. "I'm sorry, man. I should have said something." "You just did," I replied. He looked at me again, longer this time. "You're taking this too well." I let that sit for a moment before answering. "No," I said quietly. "I'm taking it exactly the way I need to. Because this wasn't a discovery anymore. It was confirmation. And confirmation doesn't create chaos. It creates direction." I didn't confront Chloe. Not that day. Not the next. Not even when the full shape of the truth settled into something undeniable. Confrontation is loud, reactive, driven by emotion that demands an immediate release, and I had no interest in release. What I needed was control, precision. So instead of raising my voice, I made a call. Andrew Foster had been my attorney for years, the kind of man who spoke carefully, listened more than he talked, and never wasted a word unless it mattered. His office reflected that same discipline. Clean lines, neutral colors, nothing unnecessary. When I walked in, he took one look at me and understood this wasn't a casual visit. "Ryan," he said, gesturing toward the chair across from his desk. "You look different." "Good different?" I asked. "Focused," he replied. That was accurate. I sat down, resting my hands calmly on the table. "I need to understand something," I said. "If a man wanted to protect what he's built, legally, quietly, before making a significant change in his life, how would he do it?" Andrew didn't answer immediately. He studied me, not suspiciously, but carefully, the way professionals do when they know the next sentence matters. "How significant?" he asked. "Significant enough that I don't get a second chance to do it right." That was all he needed. He nodded once, reached for a legal pad, and turned it toward me. "Then we do it methodically," he said. "No sudden moves, no red flags, everything documented, everything defensible. No drama, no confrontation, just structure." We spent the next hour mapping it out, step by step, joint accounts reviewed, assets separated. A private trust established under my sole control, built in a way that was not only legal, but unchallengeable. Every transfer would be documented, every decision justified. There would be no loopholes, no room for interpretation. "Timing is everything," Andrew said at one point, tapping his pen lightly against the paper. "You don't want this to look like a reaction. It needs to look like planning." "Andrew." "It is planning," I replied. He gave me a small nod. "Good." We adjusted access, restructured liquidity, and moved funds gradually rather than all at once. Enough to protect what mattered, not enough to trigger suspicion. The goal wasn't to take everything overnight. The goal was to make sure that when the moment came, everything was already where it needed to be. Secure. Untouchable. "In the house?" I asked. Andrew glanced down at the documents we had on file. "It's in your name," he said. "Always has been. That simplifies things." Of course it did. We discussed the next phase. Documentation for divorce. Prepared but not yet delivered. Filed quietly, dated carefully, positioned so that when it surfaced, it would feel sudden, even though it wasn't. "Are you sure you want to wait?" Andrew asked. "We can move forward immediately." I leaned back slightly, considering the question. "No," I said. "Not yet." He didn't press. He didn't need to. Because this wasn't about speed. It was about timing. By the time I left his office, everything had shifted. Not outwardly, not in a way anyone else could see, but internally, the direction was set. There was no confusion left, no hesitation. Just a clear sequence of actions that would unfold exactly when I decided they would. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel betrayed in the way people expect. What I felt was ready. Because once you remove emotion from the equation, what's left is strategy. And strategy doesn't need to shout to be effective. It just needs to be executed at the right moment. After that meeting with Andrew Foster, nothing changed on the surface, and that was the point. I came home at the same time, placed my keys in the same spot, asked the same simple questions about her day as if nothing in the structure of our lives had shifted. Chloe moved through the house with an ease that would have convinced anyone watching from the outside that everything between us was intact. Dinner still happened at the same hour. The television still filled the room with background noise neither of us really listened to. From a distance, we looked normal. Up close, we were something else entirely. Chloe became attentive in ways she hadn't been before. She asked about my medication, reminded me of follow-up appointments, touched my arm lightly when she passed by, as if physical contact alone could rewrite what had already been revealed. Her voice softened when she spoke to me, careful, almost rehearsed. It was the kind of care that looks convincing if you don't examine it too closely, the kind that mirrors concern without actually carrying it. Guilt has a texture. It often feels like love. If you're not paying attention, they're almost indistinguishable. I was paying attention. "Did you take your pills?" she asked one evening, standing in the kitchen doorway, watching me with a small, controlled smile. I did, I replied, not looking up from the glass of water in my hand. Good, she said softly. You scared me, Ryan. You really did. I nodded once, letting the silence stretch just long enough to feel natural. I'm okay now, I said. Yes, you are, she answered quickly, almost too quickly. She needed that to be true, not for me, for her. We moved through conversations like actors who knew their lines but not the meaning behind them. She filled the space with details, small stories, things that required no depth, no precision. And I responded exactly as expected, listening, nodding, occasionally smiling at the right moment. I gave her no reason to question anything, no signal that the ground beneath us had already shifted. Because the less she questioned, the more she revealed. Her phone stayed closer than it used to, not obvious, not careless, but deliberate. It no longer rested on the nightstand beside the bed. It disappeared into the bathroom when it charged, reappeared only when she was ready to use it. Her laughter changed depending on who she was speaking to, lighter, sharper, almost unfamiliar. And every time it happened, she moved just far enough away to keep the words out of reach. None of it was dramatic. That's what made it undeniable. Patterns don't need to be loud. They just need to repeat. At night, we sat on opposite sides of the same couch, the glow of the television flickering across two people, sharing a space, but not a reality. At one point, she leaned her head lightly against my shoulder, a gesture that would have meant something once. I didn't move away. I didn't lean in. I stayed still. Not cold, not distant, just unchanged. Because reacting would have broken the balance, and I needed everything exactly where it was. Chloe believed the quiet in me was healing, that the absence of questions meant acceptance. She mistook observation for forgiveness, stillness for surrender. That was the difference between us now. She was performing a version of normal she hoped I would believe. I was maintaining a version of normal I needed her to trust. And the more comfortable she became inside that illusion, the closer we moved to the moment it would collapse. By the time everything was in motion, it didn't feel like preparation anymore. It felt like alignment. Every piece had a place, every step had a sequence, and most importantly, nothing required urgency. I didn't rush anything. Rushing creates mistakes, and mistakes leave openings. So I moved slowly, deliberately, the way you do when you know the outcome matters more than the speed. The money was first. Not all at once, never all at once. That would have been obvious, suspicious. Instead, it shifted gradually. Controlled transfers guided by Andrew Foster's structure, each one documented, justified, and clean. Accounts that once felt shared began to separate without drawing attention. Liquidity moved into a private trust under my name, insulated, secured, positioned exactly where it needed to be. If anyone looked casually, nothing seemed different. But if you understood the structure, everything had changed. Then came access. Small things, the kind nobody notices until they matter. The house alarm code was updated. Not dramatically, just enough to ensure that when the moment came, control would rest exactly where it belonged. Passwords adjusted, notifications redirected, quiet changes that didn't disrupt daily life, but redefined who held authority within it. I didn't announce any of it. I didn't need to, because the point wasn't to warn. The point was to be ready. The timeline followed. Not written down, not formalized, but clear in my mind, with a precision that left no room for doubt. There would be a moment, a specific one, where everything would shift from unseen to undeniable. And when that moment arrived, every action taken beforehand would make sense, all at once. Before that, there was one conversation I needed to have. Linda Scott, Chloe's mother. She called me when I was in the hospital, not Chloe. That detail had stayed with me longer than anything else. There was something in her voice that day, something unsettled, like she knew more than she wanted to say out loud. So, I reached out. We spoke quietly, carefully. No accusations, no dramatic revelations, Just truth, laid out without decoration. She didn't interrupt me, didn't defend Chloe. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line, the kind that carries weight without needing words. "I'm sorry, Ryan," she said finally, her voice low, steady, but heavy with something real. "I didn't raise her to do this. I believed her." And in that moment, something shifted again, not in anger, not in judgment, but in clarity. This wasn't about tearing everything down. It was about separating what was real from what wasn't. The last step was the simplest. And the final. The divorce papers were filed quietly, days before anything outward changed, prepared with Andrew's precision, reviewed, structured, complete, not a reaction, not a threat. A decision already executed. Chloe didn't know. Dylan didn't know. No one did. Because the power in a plan like this isn't in announcing it. It's in letting everything unfold exactly when it's supposed to. By the time I was done, there was nothing left to prepare. No loose ends. No uncertainty. Just a quiet, controlled certainty that when the moment arrived, every door would open the way I intended. And all I had to do now was wait. The morning it happened, everything felt almost too normal. That was the strange part. I woke up early, made coffee, and moved through the kitchen with the same quiet rhythm I had practiced for weeks. Nothing rushed, nothing forced, just routine, steady, and controlled. Chloe came downstairs, dressed to leave, her movements precise, her tone light, already stepping into another version of the day she had prepared. "Brunch with Carol," she said, like she had said it so many times before. "Of course," I replied. I watched her leave without hesitation. No questions, no tension, just a simple goodbye, and the sound of the door closing behind her. And then I waited. Not anxiously, not impatiently, just ready. Hours passed quietly. The house stayed still, exactly the way it needed to be. And when the sound finally came, tires against the driveway, a car door closing, footsteps approaching the front door, I didn't move. The lock turned. The door opened. Chloe walked in first, laughing. Not cautiously, not carefully, laughing. And behind her, Dylan Scott. He stepped into my house, as it belonged to a version of the story where I didn't exist. A weekend bag in his hand, casual, confident, unaware. They hadn't even looked toward the kitchen yet. They were still in their own world, still inside the illusion they had been building for months. Until he saw me. It happened in less than a second. His body stopped mid-step, his grip on the bag tightening instinctively as his eyes locked onto mine. Chloe turned a fraction later, her laughter cutting off so abruptly it left something hollow in the air behind it. I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Welcome home," I said calmly. Silence. The kind that doesn't ask questions, because it already knows the answers. "Dylan, right?" I continued, setting the cup down with deliberate care. "We've never officially met." Neither of them moved. "Sit," I said, gesturing lightly toward the table. "Both of you." Chloe's face shifted rapidly. Shock, calculation, something close to denial, all of it flickering too quickly to settle into anything stable. Dylan remained still, caught between leaving and staying, not yet understanding which option would make this better. "Ryan, this isn't," Chloe started. "Chloe," I said quietly. That was enough. Whatever version of the conversation she thought she was about to control disappeared. They sat. I reached for the folder beside me and slid it across the table, first toward Chloe, then toward Dylan. "These," I said evenly, "are divorce papers, already filed." The words landed cleanly, no emphasis, no emotion, just a fact. Chloe's hands moved first, slower than they should have, like her body was trying to delay what her mind was already beginning to process. Her eyes scanned the page, and I watched the moment it became real for her. Not when she read the title, not when she saw the legal language, but when she recognized the name at the bottom. Andrew Foster. "Everything is documented," I continued. "Everything is legal. Everything is already done." Her face lost color. "The house," I added, almost conversationally, "is in my name. It always has been. The accounts have been restructured. The joint balance, what's left of it, will cover short-term expenses. After that, your attorney can coordinate with mine." "Ryan." Her voice came out smaller now, thinner, like it no longer belonged to the same person who had walked in moments earlier. I didn't respond to that. Instead, I looked at Dylan. For the first time since he entered the room, "I'll be direct," I said. "The building manager at your firm, Peter Dawson, is receiving a formal complaint within the hour. It's been reviewed, documented, signed." Dylan blinked. Once, then again, slower. "A conflict of interest," I continued, "involving a senior acquisition consultant and the spouse of another tenant. You'll want to speak to HR before they speak to you." The silence that followed was different. Heavier. Dylan's posture changed almost immediately. Not dramatically, just enough. The confidence he had walked in with, gone. Replaced by something tighter, something calculating, trying to understand how far this reached, how much damage had already been done. He didn't speak. He didn't argue, because he understood. This wasn't a threat. It was a consequence already in motion. Chloe looked between us, her breathing uneven now, her hands still gripping the papers, as they might somehow change if she held them long enough. "You planned this," she said quietly. Not accusing. Just realizing. I considered that for a moment. "I prepared," I replied. Her eyes stayed on me, searching for something that wasn't there anymore. The version of me she thought she knew. The one who would react, argue, try to fix what was broken. That version didn't exist in this room. "I'm not interested in hurting you," I added calmly. "You'll be taken care of, fairly. But this," I gestured lightly between her and Dylan, "was your decision." Dylan stood first. Slowly, deliberately. He didn't take the bag. He didn't say goodbye. He just walked out, the weight of what had just happened settling into him with every step. The door closed behind him, and the house felt quieter than it had in a long time. Chloe didn't move. She sat there, staring at the pages in front of her, as if the reality of them might still be negotiable. It wasn't, because this moment, this exact moment, had already been decided long before she walked through that door. Chloe didn't break all at once. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was slower than that, quieter, like something inside her was collapsing piece by piece as the reality of the moment settled in. The papers in her hands weren't just words. They were final, structured, irreversible. And for the first time since I had known her, she had nothing left to say that could change anything. The anger came first, brief, sharp, almost instinctive. Then it faded just as quickly, replaced by something heavier. Not regret, not completely. Something closer to realization, the kind that arrives too late to matter. "You were just normal," she said finally, her voice unsteady. "All this time, you were just sitting there, like nothing was wrong." I looked at her calmly. "I wasn't normal," I said. "You just weren't paying attention." That was the truth, and truth doesn't need to be raised to be heard. She stayed for a while after that, longer than I expected. We talked, really talked, in a way we never had when the marriage was still intact. No pretending, no performance. Just facts, laid out without protection. There was a version of her in that conversation, a quieter one, maybe even a more honest one. But honesty that arrives after consequences doesn't carry the same weight. Eventually, she left. Not in anger, not in defiance, just quietly. I stood by the window and watched her car disappear down the street, the same way I had watched it leave so many times before. But this time, there was no waiting for it to come back. The divorce was finalized months later, clean, precise, exactly as Andrew Foster had promised. Chloe received what was fair, nothing more, nothing less. Dylan Scott, from what I heard, spent a long time navigating consequences he hadn't expected to face. And, as for me, I didn't rebuild everything. I simplified it. I sold the house, bought something smaller, quieter, a space that didn't require maintenance for appearances, only presence. No extra rooms filled with expectations. No empty spaces pretending to hold something they didn't anymore. Just enough. For the first time in years, everything around me felt real. Dr. Emily Carter cleared me fully during my follow-up, said I looked better than most patients she had pulled back. I told her I felt better than I ever had, and I meant it. Not because everything had gone right, but because everything had finally become clear. That's what no one tells you about moments like that, about coming that close to losing everything. You don't come back fearless. You come back certain. Certain about what matters, certain about who shows up, and most importantly, be certain about what you will never accept again. Because here's the truth. Money can build a life, but it cannot protect it. It can create comfort, but it will never create loyalty. And it will never, no matter how much of it you have, buy you respect from someone who has already decided not to give it. And sometimes, silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's preparation. Preparation for the moment when you finally choose yourself, without hesitation, without apology. So let me ask you something. If you were in my place, would you have spoken sooner? Or would you have waited and changed everything?